with the fact that human language always, well, in a certain way, human language always is ambiguous. In contrast, for instance, with the human sign system, with the sign systems of animals. When animals are less uncertain than a human being. They are less confronted with ambiguity than a human being. And that, we can't go into detail, it's not necessary to go into detail, it would take us too far, I think, but that makes that human beings are very often confronted with a certain anxiety that is connected to this ambiguity. They look around, they try to control their world, but as they are always uncertain to a certain extent, they always feel a certain unease and a certain anxiety. And this anxiety, and that is typical, this kind of anxiety that is freely floating, that is not connected to a mental representation. And throughout the last few centuries, for one reason or another, I describe this a little bit in my book, this free-floating anxiety, this anxiety that people feel without knowing what they feel anxious for, became more and more intense. I think it has to do in many respects with the fact that the religious view on man and the world disappeared, and that the religious view on man and the world tended to focus the attention on specific, in many cases illusionary objects. But people had the feeling that they knew what they were anxious for, and that they could control their anxiety, for instance, by going to church, to give only one example.
Sorry to interrupt, but I want to make sure I'm sorry to interrupt you. This free-floating anxiety, the ambiguity that we have, or at least the way I'm hearing or the way I interpret that is, it's our mortality that leads to the anxiety. We're gonna die. We don't know when we're gonna die. There's this sort of awareness of that. I think at least the way I view it, I think there's that awareness in the back of people's minds at all times. Maybe different than an animal that doesn't have such clarity around that. And so there's the, faith is, I think, gratifying for people because it says, hey, it's not over. There's a purpose for you to be here. Here's where you're going to go. You know what I mean? Does that fit the way you're viewing this?
Of course I know.
Yes. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I think also that anxiety, indeed, it has to do with the fact that we don't seem to have an answer anymore to the question of dead and dying. we have no symbolic framework anymore to think about that and to formulate an answer to the question what will happen when we die, for instance. I think that's definitely one